and start and stop, record, take pictures.
The problem with that for us was that, or for me anyway, was that I was like, I need a watch that works for more than 5 hours. I shouldn't, like, I should at least have a watch that stays charged during my workday, you know? Yeah.
You know,
I don't think that's too much to ask.
Analog watch, baby.
Yeah. All right. Are you sure we're actually on camera there, Kels?
We're
on that one. I mean, we're framed.
Can we double check again?
Yes.
Oh, weird. We're framed.
Okay. Perfect. All right.
Oh, weird. What's up, guys? So I was trying to think about how to do this. Definitely the cool thing is, like, it doesn't have to, like, naturally flow, right? But I think it would be fun. I think it would be just more natural if it kind of did.
Yeah.
I was just going to rattle through some questions. I think I might direct some questions. Hey, Kelly, this, and Juliet, this, or both of you guys, someone start. Yeah. Kelly, loosen up. I know there's a big one for you.
He only does like 900 podcasts a week. He's fine.
I was going to say.
Awesome. Yeah. Just fire away and we'll go. And, you know, we're pretty good about riffing off each other.
I could only imagine that you guys have done this quite a bit. Well, cool. Yeah, we'll just hop into it. And yeah, I want it to be, I want it to just kind of be supernatural. So really, I want to start at the beginning and understand how you guys came to mobility, right? That seems to be the key word around your business, and, you know, why mobility, and how is that the focus?
Well, I'll take a crack at it and then Kelly can add some color commentary. But first of all, I have to say, because I'm obsessed with this, that Kelly is the reason that anybody uses the word mobility. He popularized the use of the term mobility, and I just don't often think he gets credit for that, so I have to throw that into the mix. It bothers me because everyone just thinks it's
sorry everyone, because
sorry everyone.
That word mobility now is
but
everywhere.
You know, up until Kelly basically learned that word in getting his doctorate of physical therapy, it was really used in this like deep nerd physical therapy context. Also, it was used to like describe wheelchairs. But nobody was using it in a performance context or a fitness context or like a general self-care context at all. Like the only words that were used then were stretching and like maybe range of motion. So anyway, I have to give props to Kelly for popularizing the word. But I'll start by saying we used to own a gym called San Francisco CrossFit. We were the 25th CrossFit gym to ever open in the world in 2005. And we both started the gym by having other jobs. I was still working full-time as a litigator and Kelly was working full-time as a PT, and we had the gym as a side gig.
I was actually a student.
She started as a student and then a PT. But after we had the gym for a couple years and we had a little bit of proof of concept, Kelly decided to bring his physical therapy practice inside the gym, and it was also a cash-based practice, which was pretty revolutionary at that time. And what we started seeing in Kelly's practice is that he started seeing like the exact same 5 injuries all the time, and sort of people coming to him with the same nagging problems. And in fact, it became this joke in our family where Kelly would come home at night and be like, guess the problem. You know, we'd have dinner together and he'd be like, guess the problem of the guy on my table today. And it often was boiled down to like a few pretty simple things. And Kelly was like, these people are taking 3 hours off of work and they are paying me $200 an hour cash to fix a problem that they 100% could just fix by rolling their quads at home or something like that. And so, so that was sort of, right, like, isn't that kind of where it began? I think what Kelly started seeing, I'm sorry, I have to stop this. I don't know how to turn off my notifications.
No, you're good. We can edit this out.
Jesus Christ.
Not the ding, but we can edit this out.
Anyway, let me just finish that really quick because I know Kelly has a ton to add here. He's just like waiting to add. That what Kelly realized was that people didn't understand how to move well, and they didn't make the connection between their movement and their performance, and they also didn't make the connection between their movement and their like nagging pain and injury. And so that's where our original business mobility WOD started. Kelly decided to make one 10-minute video holding the phone on himself that we published on YouTube and told no one. And the goal of it was really to help people understand how their body worked, to get some basic understanding of movement and mechanics, and then give people some of the tools to be able to fix themselves without spending a bunch of time and money on physical therapy. What do you want to add to that? Was that amazing?
That was amazing. In short, one of the issues is that there was never a conversation about position and control of position. So if you actually take the word flexibility, define it, people can't define flexibility. What they can define is, I should be able to touch my toes, or my hamstrings need to be loose. And it's really just ends up being a nebulous term. We use the word flexibility to describe the properties of a rubber hose. We want that to be flexible. And even the word stretching is really loaded, because what we found is that people don't do whatever they interpret as stretching, because it doesn't work. It doesn't have specific goals of position. It doesn't explain how to move. It doesn't explain why, if you can't move in this way, what will happen to your movement, or how you predict that sort of movement compensation. And what we did was take a swing at describing mobility as kind of two components. And I don't think people understand this. One is this: do you have the straight up tissues that allow you to express normative range, the range of motion that every human being should be able to have?
Does normative mean normal? Is it like practicable?
Normative. It's like practicable. And the idea here is every physician on the planet, every physical therapist on the planet agrees you should be able to put your arms straight up over your head. The problem is we really got into the weeds on different kinds of exercise and intensive exercise, but what we had was a lack of technique, and the technique is the second component to this. So do I have the ability to put my arms over my head, and then do I have the ability to control said motions with all of its rotation and stability built in? So mobility is about the ability to actually access a normative range, the tissues that through evolution and that you are supposed to have, that everyone has. Everyone agrees this is what we learn in physio school and in med school. And then the second thing is, do you have control over that? And that's that motor control or movement control. And those things are combined together. Now look, the human being is complex, and movement behavior is complex, and the brain is a movement solution-based thing. So if I say to you, I need you to move these bags from here to here, or run this, you'll solve that problem no matter what. But that doesn't necessarily tell you what best expression of the technique is. And because the human being is so durable, because we're so able to buffer less than perfect positions for a long, long time, sometimes we can't make the connection between, hey, I'm not being my most efficient, my most effective self, which is also how we win gold medals, with also, will I ever get injured in this position? And what oftentimes happens is that we divorce our experience of pain from any other thing. Because look, I can be sleep deprived and super stressed and eat an inflammatory diet and have a previous injury and be easily sensitized and still move well, but be stiff. And so what we haven't done there in this language is create movement vital signs. Here's what everyone should be able to do. And when we came into this world, everything was based on correlates. So like if the movement human language is, let's just say Spanish, then we were teaching classical Greek as ways of understanding that. That was the medical model. That's why athletes didn't understand. And so when we started making the movement model, the movement language, push up, squat, deadlift, hinge, pull up, everyone understood that language. And it turns out that's the formal movement language of human beings. And if we can understand those components, then you have the range of motion and the control. Then to go do like classic, instead of going classical ballet, now you can do freestyle, interpretive dance. And that's the issue, is that people are running around with their handbrakes on, can't access their positions, have crappy movement control in those positions, and then wonder why we're slow or wonder why our tissues get irritable, et cetera, et cetera. So that is the short story of mobility.
No, I love that. And do you feel like mobility is, sorry, it's a little bit of a loaded question, but do you feel like mobility is one of the most underserved aspects of wellness? Because I was an athlete myself. I still consider myself an athlete, right? I don't really feel like I understand mobility. I know stretches, I've memorized stretches, but I don't understand mobility, like I do, diet, strength training, cardio training.
So let's say this. Instead of the word mobility, which doesn't have a root or a basis of sort of foundational thinking for you, what if I said position? Because the components of mobility make up your ability to express position. So the problem is, what we've said is, well, as long as you put another pound on the bench press, you're getting stronger and your technique is good, right? Your shoulder doesn't hurt today and you got a little stronger, keep going. And that doesn't explain what the best way to bench is, or the best way to use your shoulder, or how that bench press makes you better at pushing your stroller, carrying your laundry, or throwing someone in judo. Why is it that we like all our Olympic rowers to learn how to bench press? Well, it turns out that benching, as an old coach said, ties the arms to the body, which means if you can create stability while you bench, you're actually more stable pushing and pulling on an oar. And so what ends up happening then is, as soon as I say to you, here's what the key ranges of motion that you should be able to have, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, when we mobilize, instead of just doing more movement work, which when you hear the word corrective exercise, you should think, oh, hey, this is a more movement skill. Corrective exercises are the same thing as skill transfer exercises. This is why we do drills when we learn sports. Those are corrective exercises. But if your hip can't flex all the way, if you can't bring your knee to your chest, then it doesn't matter how many drills we do, you can't access your position. And so what we end up doing is missing the benchmarks or the roots of your position. You don't have the ability to get in the swimming pool or do downward dog effectively. And so the real question is it good enough? What is good enough? Shouldn't normative or baseline human movement be the thing we're after? If everyone can understand 120/80 as a blood pressure reference, why can't we say, hey, you should be able to squat with your heels on the ground? The same kind of thinking is true.
And I just want to add and maybe take it down to like the masses.
That was the masses.
We're working on a book right now called Built to Move, and we're really excited about it. And the way that we've described mobility in that book is the ability to move freely through the environment and do all the things you want to do without getting injured or being in pain.
Well, let me hedge on that for a second.
It's more complicated than that. Hold on, it's more complicated than that. But for the regular masses who aren't going to understand drills and movement language and complex stuff, the goal, and I think to get to your point about these, what I think you were asking is, should mobility be a pillar of health, right? The health and fitness community talks about these pillars of health: nutrition, exercise, sleep. And our answer to that is 100%. It's a huge missing piece of these pillars of health because, everybody actually takes for granted how much they want to be able to move freely and pain-free throughout their life. It doesn't matter whether what you like to do is ride your Peloton and that brings you joy, or whether you want to play with your grandkids on the weekend, or whether you want to do the Kona Ironman triathlon. Everybody has some movement goal in their life, right? And everybody wants to be able to do those things for their whole lives. So yes, to answer your question, 100% mobility and care about movement and mechanics is 100% this huge missing piece of these pillars of health.
And one of the easiest things to do is recognize that when you feel pain, which is why a lot of times people care suddenly about their range of motion or ability.
All of a sudden.
Right?
All of a sudden.
And it's okay. There's a lot going on in people's lives. And until we have said, hey, the environment you're living in isn't conducive to a human being being able to maintain their range. You're not sleeping on the ground. You don't toilet on the ground. You don't work on the ground. You don't even get up and down off the ground. The number one reason people end up in nursing homes is they can't get up and down off the ground independently. There's a really good test about just sitting cross-legged, stand cross-legged, sit to the ground, stand back up without using your hands, and it predicts mortality and morbidity. And that's not even full range of motion. That's just sitting cross-legged. But the number of people who can't get up and down off the ground from a cross-legged position without using their hands is astounding.
As most people.
And that's not about strength. That's just about accessing really mid-range range of motion. So one of the things that we know is that when people have pain, again, does not mean injury, does not mean trauma. It certainly can be. If you got hit by a car, then those things are going to be linked, right? But oftentimes, pain is just a signal, like decreased force production, like foggy brain, like not being able to be strong, or going for a run and running a 5K and being slowed down. I don't know why. Well, pain is actually the same level of information there. But what's nice is we can then kind of deconstruct your position and say, well, hey, I see that you can't put your arms over your head. That's something that we can control. And by returning people's native ranges, their natural ability to express movement the way they should be able to, oftentimes we get pain mitigation, pain attenuation in the bargain. But what we're really focusing on is not the removal of pain, because that's actually a really low bar. We're actually trying to make you go faster, move more efficiently, more effectively, so that not only can you play with your kids or do your Peloton, but you actually feel good and you have energy for the rest of the day. That is the same level of thinking that we're using when we work with the NFL, Major League Baseball, the military, the Olympics. We focus the same way on performance, and it turns around it's the same coin when we're talking about being durable or being able to play with your kids or have less pain.
The other thing that I wanted to add to this that we've seen, and I think back to your original question about like how did we start this and why do we care about mobility and why is it a thing, is that on this pain front, we saw so many people in our physical therapy clinic who couldn't make the connection between some kind of catastrophic injury they had and their movement. We would have so many runners come in after they had a catastrophic ACL explosion or an Achilles tear, and they would be so confused, like, I don't understand. Like, I've been running for 25 years, and just one day on my morning run, it was no different than any other run. And, the thing that people don't realize is, again, what Kelly said is the body is amazing, and its ability to adapt and manage your working in suboptimal mechanical positions is astounding. Like, the human body is amazing and complex what it can do and how much sort of poor movement it can buffer. But it can buffer, if you're a runner and you take, a 5-mile run 5 times a week, and then you aggregate that over 25 years, and every single time you're stepping and then collapsing your arch. So maybe by the 500,000th step you take, your Achilles is like, okay, that was the last time that I can do it in that position, right? So you may not injure yourself with poor mechanics on your first, your second, your 10th, your 200th movement in a position.
Thank goodness, that gives us a chance to learn a skill.
Right, it gives you a chance to learn a skill.
I don't have to be perfect.
But at some point, your body may just say, okay, yeah, all right, I can no longer buffer these poor positions, right? So what we are always trying to do, which is a huge challenge for us, is to actually get people to care before they get injured. I mean, often people find us
or before they lose.
Often people find us and find our work because they either aren't performing up to their capabilities in whatever sport or movement they're doing, and then more often it's because they're have a nagging pain or injury, and then they realize they sort of have this like moment of satori, like, oh my God, actually I can't do all this work and use this machine that is my body all the time and never put any input back into my body in the form of taking care of it. And a lot of that can literally be done like while you're sitting on the floor Netflixing at night. So it's like the other thing that we say to people is like, you do have time. Like, we're really busy. Like, one of the things, these messages that we're trying to get out to people is like, we're not like a lot of the fitness professionals that people see on Instagram that have our shirt off and we're spending 8 hours a day squatting and making videos of ourselves exercising. Like, that's not what we do. Like, we're parents, we're running a big, huge business. We've got employees. Like, most of the days, like, we're hunched over in front of our computers, just like, working like normal people. And so we have to figure out how to fit these practices in on the periphery. And that's one of these messages that we're trying to get in, that it's like, what we've always said is, man, 10 minutes a day, like everybody has 10 minutes a day. Like, you're not too busy. Everybody's on their phone on TikTok or watching Netflix or whatever they're doing. And that is the perfect time to put a little input into your body and actually like learn how your body works and how to get some slack on your stiff tissues. And, the downstream benefit of that is you'll be a better athlete. You'll be a faster runner. You'll be able to move more freely. You're less likely to have nagging pain and injury. You're going to live longer. You're going to be more durable when you're old. I mean, it really is like it reaps. I mean, besides sleep, which Kelly and I think of, if we could prioritize all these pillars of health, like to us, sleep is like the A number one, like most important. It
Yep.
is in a different category, like of all these other pillars. But besides sleeping, like you got to put some input and care into your body.
So an easy way to think about this is to say, hey, look, let's look at this body as a system, and no system works by itself. So when we do soft tissue work, maybe we're trying to improve how tissues are sliding and gliding. And maybe your muscles have trigger points, well documented, or they're overly stiff because you're an athlete, or maybe your joint tissues become stiff. So we can work on those things. Well, it also turns out you're not expressing good technique, and good technique allows you to lift more, run faster, and transfer skills from training to actual moving. Because if I just say get stronger, well, I can get you stronger with just a bunch of steroids and a machine, and we haven't even worked on your technique, right? So the idea is technique matters. So we've got these tissue components, we've got technique, but as Juliet just hinted out, the last component is your lifestyle. That we have to talk about your sleep and your stress and nutrition and hydration, and do you feel safe and loved if we're going to move well and move fast. And it turns out we learned all this because we work in sport. Because if I go to the most gnarly environments where people are putting their bodies through the hardest things, it turns out those are usually high performance environments. And we can take those lessons from high performance environments where we can't win a gold medal or a world championship unless we're taking care of the system, and we can apply them to the rest of us mere mortals. Let's start sleeping, eating, doing all the things that we know in lifestyle, a little soft tissue work. Let's move as well as we can today. And that's enough because you're durable as heck.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. And, it's funny, I was just reading a book that talked about how everyone has their individual discipline that teaches them other life lessons, like you're talking about in a high performance environment. You guys both allude to something that's really exciting for me, right? As I said, I call myself an athlete. Let's call it a pseudo athlete. I have my dad, right? Might be someone who he's not really playing sports anymore, but he's starting to have trouble with things around the house, right? He complains about getting out of the car is difficult, things like that. So you also talked about like a quick 10-minute, mobility session, Juliet, for busy people. So it's clear that this needs to be something for everybody, right? Not just athletes, right? It needs to be something for everybody. What's a good way to get into mobility if you're just the everyday person? I know there's a lot of what ifs, right? What hurts or whatever, but what are some really good foundational, easy ways to do it for someone that has no knowledge?
So to begin with, the thing you need to do is spend time in the full ranges of your body. So an easy way to improve your hip range of motion, for example, and again, why should we care about hip range of motion? Because more hip range of motion, or normative or baseline hip range of motion, makes it easier for me to get out of my car, makes it easier for me to express the strength I have, and makes me feel less achy and sore. And I could begin that by just sitting on the ground. So if you want to get better at getting up and down off the ground someday, the easiest thing to do is to get up and down off the ground. So Juliet and I, for example, the very first video we ever made in 2010 was called the 10-minute squat test, which was, why can't you build a fire or hang out in a squat for 10 minutes straight? And just like you would if we were, sitting around the beach and building a fire, we'd be sitting cross-legged, side saddle, squatting. And that test blew people's minds. That's like I'm saying, I want you to breathe for 10 minutes. You're like, whoa, I can't breathe for 10 minutes. This is crazy.
Yeah.
So one of the first orders of business is to do the thing instead of adding complexity and bands and rollers and voodoo floss and techniques and percussion. Let's just start spending time in the positions that we value. And a simple way to begin to incorporate range of motion drills into something you're already doing is to sit in front of your couch on the ground. And every time you feel like you need to fidget, change your position, sit side saddle, kneel, sit cross-legged.
Yeah.
And what the first order of business there is we start to expose the tissues to end range positions. And more importantly, we tell the brain, this is something that's important and that I need you to pay attention to this. So we say that practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. And so, you know, the idea here is that we want people to practice positions and shapes. And that means as a typical working person living in our current environment, we may need to do some things. We're not really doing a lot of climbing in trees anymore. But turns out one of the best practices on the planet to maintain your ability to put your arms over your head and take a big breath and swim and do downward dog is hang from a pull-up bar. I don't even care if you can do a pull-up. Can you just put your arms overhead and begin to hang? So notice that the first thing that we're saying is, hey, instead of worrying about what supplement you need to take, let's start eating some food. Let's start doing some walking. So we can begin to really change the quality of your tissues by doing the things that everyone knows they need to do. And we can begin to expose your brain and expose your tissues to the range of motion that you need to do by doing things like sitting on the ground and being more movement curious during the day. Then you could layer on
doing like a simple soft tissue practice. I mean, I think the other story that I'd like to tell, and I think as, you know, if we're talking about as people age, you know, one of the other things that we think is sort of included in this base camp of health is balance. And it's something that people don't think about often enough or practice. And obviously those who have a yoga practice probably get some great balance work in there. And, you know, certain athletes are doing balance practice, but by and large, people aren't really thinking about balance. And when I first started,
one of those things that people take for granted.
They take for granted, right?
And you start to not balance.
Yeah, and it's not until, you know, people start to get into their like mid to late 60s,
and they're afraid to do something, or they fall.
They're afraid to go downstairs. So the example that I will give is that I noticed in my mom's early 70s, and by the way, my mom is super fit, super healthy, lean. Like, she's done most of the right things in her life.
Trained in our gym for a decade.
Like, trained in our gym, lifts a weight. Like, she's like checking so many of the boxes, but one box she didn't check was working on her balance. And so by her early 70s, she no longer felt comfortable riding a bike.
So her world got a little smaller.
So, you know, if she, and she was never a big biker, but it's like, you know, she can't go on vacation to Hawaii and rent a beach cruiser and ride a bike because she doesn't feel comfortable.
But now she's...
Can I pause you guys right there for 1 second? Great story, Julia, and I love the addition, Kelly. You said the world got a little smaller, and I think this is how we can bring, you know, what you guys are doing at the Ready State from high-performance athletes and everyday athletes to everybody, right?
Yeah.
You know, people that all of a sudden can't golf anymore, can't bike anymore, you know, can't go downstairs. So I love that analogy of the world getting smaller, right? People start to repress these things and not really, you know, think about them.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's really important, and I think it happens for a lot of people sooner than they think. I think, you know, maybe someone listening to this who's in their 20s, they'll be like, whatever, that's 50 years away from me. But, you know, people start to experience that as early as their 40s. I mean, the other example I'll give is that, you know, by the time we're 40, you know, when we're 32, it's like everybody we know is like a recreational runner. Everybody runs and they run 3 miles and they go on trips, they run and they take 3-mile runs. By the time you get to 40, it's like 1% of my friends run, because guess what? Nobody can run anymore.
It doesn't feel good.
It doesn't feel good because they've all gotten injured and whatever, right? And so it's like, okay, you know, maybe you're not ready to, you know, worry too much about whether you can get up off the floor when you're 27. But man, the ability to continue running is a rare ability these days. And it's like when you're 27, you need to care about your mechanics if you want to be able to run past 40. Because I'm one of those people. I ran a ton, injured my hip. Haven't, you know, I can do a little bit of like 400-meter runs and stuff, but it really hurts for me to do long runs. So like that, my world got smaller in that way, because when I was young, I didn't focus on my mechanics. I didn't care about my movement quality in running, and I injured myself. And so my world got smaller. So I think that that's like a huge piece of this. And, you know, one of the things we're working on in our book and trying to share is, you know, and actually, speaking of my mom, back to the story about my mom, you know, losing her ability to ride a bike. That's actually why in our early 40s, Kelly and I took up mountain biking. I mean, not the only reason we took it up, because it's fun, of course. There are a variety of reasons. It's good fitness, it's fun, or whatever. But I was like, man, I really want to be able to ride my bike when I'm in my 70s. Like, that's a skill I want to have. And guess what? You know, if I don't start practicing that skill now, today, in my 40s, that's a skill that I'm not going to be able to have.
And it's not just about riding a bike, right? I think that's the expression. Right. You know, one of the ways that we can say to this is, for people, is I'm like, do you do a sport? People are like, yes. do you train for sport? And people are like, yes, of course, you go to practice. And I'm like, so why aren't we applying that same thinking towards skills like running or swimming or carrying a backpack? Like, you just need to do a little training. And that training we can expand. It doesn't mean I have to go to the gym. It means I can have a kettlebell in my garage. It means I can work on my balance in my kitchen. I can sit on the ground. If we learned anything in COVID, that we were poorly prepared to take care of our bodies. What we saw was depression went through the roof. We saw opiate use, pain management go through the roof. Alcohol went through the roof. We also saw people gain weight and not know how to take care of themselves because their systems changed, their environments changed. And what we're suddenly seeing is that, the revolution maybe isn't that I have to go to a big gym, but that I actually, with very simple tools, can take care of my body and have a movement practice. And that's what we want people to expand. We want to move away from this idea of diet and exercise. And diet is never about performance, it's about body composition, right? So I'm changing how I eat so I can be skinnier. And exercise, most people are exercising so they can be skinnier, right? But what we're saying is, let's change and expand this conversation into what does physical practice look like? Well, that means I need to sleep, and I get my 10 to 12,000 steps a day, and maybe I work on my range of motion or my skill or my balance. And pretty soon what you're realizing in there is that you've got a baseline, or what we call a base camp practice. Then we layer in a little yoga or a little Pilates or a little complete movement where I'm using a kettlebell, I'm doing some squats and some calisthenics and some classics of strength and conditioning. And pretty soon I'm exposing my tissues to all the ranges they need. And that's pretty revolutionary. And now we're not even basically talking about how fit you are on the bike or how strong you are, how skinny you are. We're saying, hey, here are the things you have to be able to do to be a human. And if you don't believe me, go to the airport and watch people put their arms up in the scanner. People are overextended and they can't put their arms up and their heads are in weird positions. And you're like, wow, when did it become difficult for you to put your arms over your head? That's crazy town. And then when your shoulder ends up hurting, it's potentially very confounding for people to realize that, hey, there's a relationship between why my shoulder hurts and why I can't do the things that every shoulder should be able to do.
I think the other thing that I wanted to talk about, Sean, in this, to answer your original question about how do people start a practice like this, I think Kelly's exactly right. The first thing is there are so many things you can do without any tools at all, which are do the things you want to be able to do. So if you want to be able to get up off and down off the ground or in and out of your car, you need to practice getting up and down off the ground. One easy way to do that is to watch TV on the ground and work on the ground a little bit. We're all working from home. So rather than sitting at your table or standing at your standing desk, sit down on the floor and work at your coffee table for a couple hours. Sit on the floor while you're watching Netflix. The bonus is that while in order to get to the floor and up off the floor, you're putting your joints through their full range of motion. So, same thing like Kelly said, hanging from a pull-up bar. But the other strategy that we have, because ultimately human beings are lazy and we are the same, is that we like to pepper our environment. And this is a thing that we learned when our kid was a baby. Our daughter, Georgia, would sleep really well if she had a pacifier in her mouth. But while she was sleeping, it would fall out, and then she couldn't find it again and put it back in her mouth on her own. And so she would start crying, and then we would need to go attend to her at 2 o'clock in the morning. And our pediatrician said, dude, just pepper her crib with 50 pacifiers. So no matter where she is in her crib, there's always going to be one right there in front of her that she can just put right back into her mouth. And by the way, that worked like a charm. And so we've used that same concept of peppering our environment. So if you look at our living room where our TV is, we have a bunch of tools in there. We have some percussion guns, we have some foam rollers, we have a bunch of different balls and little tools that you can use to mobilize. We have some little teeny thin cushions that you can sit on the floor so that sitting on the floor isn't uncomfortable. We have some Normatec boots. We've got this whole, we've peppered the environment. So it's actually almost impossible to not be doing something while you're sitting in there watching TV. Same thing with our balance practice. We've got a couple of balance boards in our garage and we keep these little balance beams around. We're huge fans of this product called the Slack Block, which I have sitting right by my standing desk. And so we just pepper our environment with these ways to play and practice some of these skills. And I think that's part of it is like
it's not one more thing you have to do. It's like part of the day.
Like we have a slack block in our kitchen. So it's like we'll chop some vegetables and then go stand on the slack block for 10 seconds and then chop some vegetables. And what we're trying to do is really incorporate these things into our lives. So it's not easy to not do them. It's really easy to do them.
And what's great about this kind of thinking about your tissue health or mobility or range of motion or your movement is you can apply this thinking then to the rest of the world, rest of your day. So this is what we call environmental constraint. So if one of the things that Juliet figured out a long time ago is to get her kids to eat more fruit, her kids, because my kids would eat fruit, but her kids wouldn't. If she chopped up fruit and put it in a cute little bell jar, our kids would grab it and take it to school. So if you don't want to snack on crap, go ahead and pre-cut up some fruit and you'll be like, oh, look at this sport candy here, and then you'll eat it.
Well, and then don't pre-cut it up and put it in some gross plastic Tupperware.
No one wants to eat out of a Tupperware.
No one wants to eat gross food out of a Tupperware, but everyone wants to eat food out of like a cool little bespoke glass jar.
If you can make the environment more conducive for you to not have to make another choice or make another decision or add another thing to your busy laundry list of stuff you're going to get done. If I tell my CEO wife, who's killing it, here's a checklist of things you need to do to have a perfect mobility practice, she'd be like, whatever.
I don't got time for that.
You're going to add that on? But if we can configure our brains to think, oh, how do I incorporate this so it's not one more heroic activity where I have to get the willpower together, then we really start to see these behaviors become sticky. And that is called adherence. And that is the thing we're obsessed with. How do we get people to do what they know and we know is best for them? Well, it means we need to go into the environment and say, where are the places where we can do this so that when it's time to go for a walk, you don't have to be thinking, I need to do this breathing practice and this walking practice and I need to swim. You just go for a walk.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, you said, Juliet, that, humans are lazy. And it's funny, one thing that I did was I put water by my bedside.
Yes.
And, instead of waking up and trying to go downstairs and maybe getting a cup of coffee or something, that's the hard move. You're thirsty when you wake up. There's water right there. My laziness makes me drink water, right? You want to, we react to our environment. We always live in the subconscious. So I really, I guess relate to that right there. I want to ask a question. So now we're talking about mobility and trying to bring it into practical movements. And in preparing for this, I saw Kelly, someone called you one of the founding fathers of CrossFit. And I want to talk about how mobility, this is me starting to do a clean relating to CrossFit, how mobility relates to these different movements, specifically in CrossFit, right? Because CrossFit is now a lot of explosive moves, right? A lot of heavy.
It can be. It can be. It doesn't have to be. So the way to think about being a skilled mover as a person is, let's just say one of the things you're going to need to do to be in CrossFit or in any good movement practice is put your arms over your head. We've been talking about that, right?
Yeah.
Well, you're thinking, hey, I don't lift weights, but you swim. Okay, so you need to be able to put your arms over your head to get into a good streamlined position. Well, do you do yoga? Okay, well, you've got to do downward dog. So suddenly what we can say is, hey, there's this root position. And now we're going to challenge your ability to get into that position. And we can do that classically with like a barbell where we make it heavier and heavier and heavier. Where eventually we see technique start to falter. You start to make more movement errors. There's more variability in your movement. You're not practicing a skill. You're just moving, doing work. So at some point, and then the thing stops. So it's really easy for us to say, oh, the weight was too heavy. Well, there's more than one way to challenge that position instead of just putting a heavier weight on it. We suddenly can make you breathe hard and do that, and go to a hot yoga class and let me know how that goes for you. You're suddenly breathing hard and panting and you're hot and you can't do downward dog very well. What happened? Well, I don't know. I thought I was really good at downward dog. Well, it turns out that wasn't a very stable skill. What happens when you add speed to that? What happens if instead of doing 5 reps, you had to do 10 reps or 15 reps? That's swimming. That's repetition, right? So all of a sudden what we realize is that we have all of these ways to challenge your position. But now I'm like, okay, now I need you to hang on these rings. Now I need you to hang on this pull-up bar. Now I need you to go from an overhead to an overhead position by pressing, but now I need you to go to overhead position by snatching. And then we're gonna snatch a dumbbell and a kettlebell and a barbell. And suddenly, I'm like, we should flip upside down and challenge your handstand, which is another way of being overhead. And what we've done is said, hey, look at all these tools that we have to keep you entertained, to keep you challenging your ability to manage your position. But notice that CrossFit is rooted, for example, in all of these practices. But the foundational thing is putting your arm over your head. So if you go to a landmine press, I never have to put my arm over my head. I can still train. I can just press this dumbbell. Or I go to a machine and I never have to expose balance and skill. And so the issue and the reason we put mobilization or mobility or ability to have range of motion that you can control first is that if you don't have that, it makes learning these skills and transference of these skills so difficult. And range of motion is not about age or power or cardio. Range of motion is the one aspect of your body that doesn't have to change as you age. We tend to see people get stiffer, but stiffer doesn't mean you still can't access your basic range of motion. So at what point do you stop being able to get off a toilet because your hips are too stiff or off the ground? You'll see that that's a ridiculous conversation. Human beings are able to move forever, but when you go into a class like a CrossFit class that suddenly says, hey, you're gonna have to put your arms over your head, and we have 10,000 different ways to do that, it seems to me that a really simple way to make that easier is to be able to put your arms over your head.
Well, and I think part of the reason the CrossFit community was one of the earliest adopters and why our work was so quickly adopted by the CrossFit community is there's almost no other practice besides CrossFit that asks people to get into all of these ranges of motion. I mean, there's 150 different movements you could potentially experience in any given CrossFit class, and a lot of them require you to be able to express full range of motion. So people learn often for the first time in their life when they go to a CrossFit class that they are lacking massive amounts of range of motion because they've never actually had to try to express that doing anything else in their life, because they've been working in these mid-ranges on their Peloton or whatever it is they're doing. A CrossFit class, the first time people are like, oh my God, if I want to be able to perform any of the Olympic lifts, I need to have ankle range of motion and hip range of motion.
Or swing a kettlebell.
And so I think it's lack of range of motion and mobility is exposed immediately for people in CrossFit, and that gets people to care, right? And so,
And have you ever been to a yoga class and got your butt kicked? Do you think you're not strong enough to do yoga, or does it your positions and control sucks? So it's, again, these movement practices which ask us to have access to our basic ranges and control there. That's really the thing.
It's funny you say that because, again, trying to relate it to my own experience as, someone who's not high-level athlete but tries to take it seriously. I would do the same thing. Like my girlfriend, but hey, let's go into a yoga class, right? I'm like, I stretch, I play basketball, I can lift weights. They get you into like a position that's uncomfortable, like you're talking about. And it was a hot yoga class, of course. Your breath is going. I start shaking, and I'm like, wait. We're like 20 seconds into this position. I know I could do 70 straight push-ups. Why am I shaking, right? And you start to realize it's because you're like fighting against your own body there. Because
That's right.
I don't have that mobility.
That's right. And, ultimately, you have to be able to do three things with your tissues. You have to be able to absorb force. That's like lowering into a squat. I have to be able to stop. That's called an isometric. That's just pausing and have control there. And then I have to be able to go concentrically. I have to be able to generate force, like standing up from a squat. And one of the things that we can then do is start to ask, well, is this practice exposing these components of the movement and the things you're doing? So yoga is really good at what? A lot of isometrics. They do a ton of, let's hold this position, let's make sure you can breathe in this position, and they do an amazing job there. Is there a lot of pulling in yoga? Oh, there's no pulling in yoga. So you're never challenging these shapes. Are you moving a huge load in yoga? No. So what we find suddenly is that people are trying to use yoga to solve all of these movement problems, and yoga was never set out to be that thing, right? And so suddenly what we can, Juliet and I are like, look, if you're taking your shoulder into extension some ways, that's fine. There's so many ways. And that means like the bottom position of a push-up. There's so many ways to do that. That's chaturanga and yoga. But if you're engaged in a practice that doesn't ever expose your shoulder to come back, like doing a dip or a push-up, you have a hole in the things that you should be able to do with your body. And by the way, that's how you take your arm out of the water when you swim. So there's a ton of that valuable motion that we need to expose people to in their movement practice. So Juliet and I have strong feelings about, hey, we think you should be able to deadlift, you should be able to pick something up heavy off the ground, you should be able to do a pull-up, you should be able to do a few push-ups. But for starters, we're saying, hey, let's just start getting into these positions. So here's an example. I have a daughter who's 13. She grew very fast. She's the tallest woman in our family. She's almost 5'10", and she's 13. How many 5, 10-year-old, 13-year-olds have a lot of pull-ups that you know? None. So what we work on is hanging from a bar and exposure to isometrics or the top of the motion. Can she hold that position? So I'm working. I don't really care if she can do a pull-up. Eventually I'll care. But right now I'm starting to expose her to the start position and finish position of the pull-up. And that way I get all the tissue exposure and her brain starts to say, oh, look, I own these two positions. Not the pull-up that matters.
The other thing I want to add, and this isn't really a question that you asked, and it may not be relevant for this, but while we talk about how complicated the human body is and how amazing it is to buffer, the point I want to make, though, is that a lot of people think mistakenly that they are super special. And they're like, oh, I'm a swimmer, so I have a swimmer's shoulder. And so I need to see a person who's an expert in swimmer's shoulder. And then I'm a weightlifter, and so I have this special hip, and then I've got this special calf. Well, that's not true. The positions of the body and the normative ranges of motion are the same for every sport. And the shoulder's a shoulder, whether you're expressing it in a swim stroke or whatever else. And so I want to just, I don't know, it bugs me because people think the principles are the same.
Principles are the same and range of motion are the same. And that's ultimately a really important point why being in a good strength and conditioning practice and having good technique there matters. And why sitting down on a machine and getting a big bicep is less useful in terms of transferability to skill. So, the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. And what we're looking at is, hey, how do I prepare myself to be able to go and train? Am I using my physical practice to become better on my surfboard or better at my golf game? Does my physical practice transfer? Well, I have these bigger pecs, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to be a more efficient swimmer or a more efficient biker. So do I have my cyclists do bench press? Yes. The more effectively they can control the handlebars and create a stable shoulder off of the handlebars means that they can transfer more energy to the pedals and their wattage goes up. So again, it's not just about raw physiology. I was able to, I have bigger muscles, I have stronger tendons. That doesn't express how skillful people need to be in their movements and why these things should matter to you in the gym, because we're training for life. But if we don't ever put the root position in there of, hey, you can't do what a human should be able to do, that's a really simple place to start for people.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear the way that you bring that up, because I think, you mentioned, right, like, what are we going to do with bigger biceps? And it comes down to your goal. For most people, bigger biceps isn't that, valuable to have, right? It's more of something that they like to have, but then at what cost? You could spend that time working on mobility or something that's more functional. Guys, looking at the clock here, this is where I'm going to start rattling off some questions to both of you guys. And we're going to look for a little bit shorter, quicker answers. So...
Okay, we'll try. We'll work. We'll go. Let's go.
We got 15 seconds. I mean, this is the whole problem with TikTok.
I know. Let's start with this. Behind you, I see some books. What are you guys reading nowadays?
Oh man, I mean, actually, I am reading Anson Doran's book. He is the winningest coach at UNC Chapel Hill, winningest coach of all time, I think, women's soccer coach at UNC Chapel Hill. And I think it's called, what's the name of the book?
The Man Watching.
The Man Watching. And anyone who is a coach or coaches anyone should read this book. It should be like the #1 book. Everybody we know who's coaching at a high level loves this book. And so I'm in the midst of it.
Julie and I are big readers, and I usually have 2 or 3 books going at once. I happen to be buried into a couple sci-fi books right now that I read and kind of bounce back and forth, and then I try to read something serious on the side about some aspect, but not usually in physical therapy or in performance, something else that I feel like will help me bring a new thought back to the way I think about the problems of the human body.
Kelly, let me ask you about that. I read 2 books at once. One's always a story. One's always like that second category, trying to learn a little bit more. Do you read those books at different times of the day or in different occasions?
Yeah, sometimes I get super obsessed with one thing. I have Bruce Mao's new book, which is how to like change. It's like MC24, Make Change 24, 24 principles for design and thinking about problems in a new way. That's just on my table, and I will read a couple pages, and then I actually need time to think about it and integrate and think differently about the problem. But then the escapism through the sci-fi, and again, I've got a couple good sci-fi books going right now. One fantasy book, one sci-fi book. Reading is total escapism and wonderful for me. But one is always a vacation from the other, and depending on what I want to do or how nerdy I'm feeling, I'll go one to the other.
Love it. Yeah, I generally end my workday with like an educational book, and at night I have to pick up the story. Because if I'm reading something that like I need to contemplate after, it doesn't always connect for me. Now, this is a fun question. I'm gonna direct at you first, Kelly. Why a supple leopard?
Supple Leopard came about for a couple reasons. One of my favorite movies is Gallipoli with Mel Gibson, and early on, it's this young kid who's training, and he's the promise of a generation. He's a 100-meter runner, and his uncle says to him, as his coach says, what are your legs? And he's like, steel springs. He's like, how fast are you gonna run? He's like, fast as a leopard. And I love that. That really hung in my head. And the second thing is I had a friend who was a Navy SEAL who was injured and was coming back, and he's like, Kelly, the leopard never stretches. And I was like, we know that's true, but one is that you're not a leopard, and 2, you don't have full access to your physiology instantaneously. So one of the magics of this kind of leopard as our totem animal is that leopard can attack and defend at full physical capacity at a moment's notice. It doesn't have to activate its glutes or warm up. Doesn't have to eat it just is its full thing and has access to all its potential. So some of what we're trying to do with that language of supple leopard is say, hey, look, I want you to be able to have full capacity, full actuality of your person without having to do a bunch of silliness. Why are we walking around at 50% of our ability when you should be able to enjoy being a human being, which is pretty extraordinary? So that's the idea.
Awesome. And you said enjoy being a human being. Kind of going back to what we were talking about, like, do you, in the beginning when we were talking about that, if you can't bike, right, your world shrinks. Is that something that people come to you as a problem, or is that one of those things that you're trying to highlight more of? That like, hey, you don't necessarily have to be in pain. You could just be avoiding certain things because, you don't have access to it.
Well, we actually see that people don't make that decision for different reasons. Hey, I've stopped running or swimming, I'm swimming less, or I'm picking something up more, or hey, I've started to ride my bike more because running doesn't feel good. And so the world is getting smaller on them in small motions, not like, hey, I stopped going to the gym because that doesn't feel good, right? And what we're really trying to help people do here is explore being curious, enjoy the environment, pick up new skills. One of the ways that we define best athlete is who can pick up the new skill the fastest. At what point do you stop healing? What point do you stop learning? What we know is that when you stop being curious, there's a reason why Wordle is a thing. But when you stop challenging your brain atrophies. You stop learning new skills, your brain atrophies. So let's look at movement skill and movement curiosity as just a different kind of behavior like my reading or cognition. It's just a different aspect. The movement behavior is your thoughts made manifest in the world. And so what we're trying to do is say, hey, let's just keep all the lights on in the house and then be curious about the things we want to do as we get older.
I would also challenge people to actually make some goals around what they want to be able to do physically in the future. You know, I'm in all these entrepreneur groups, and all we do all the time is do 2-year, 3-year, 5-year, 20-year business plans, and everybody's doing all this goal setting and vision boards. But, you know, I would actually challenge people to do that for your movement. So what do you physically want to be able to do in the next 5, 10, 20, 25 years? And how are you backfilling your life to be able to do those things? So if you want to be able to continue running when you're 50, what are you doing right now at 27 to make sure you're still going to be able to do that? So, and I would actually challenge people to write that down as a goal. We spend so much time in our lives making all these goals and visions and plans, and none of those are ever about physical goals or plans.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love how you said write it down. I think when you write something down, it becomes so much more real.
Don't just think about it.
Yeah. All right. You guys clearly do a ton every day and in your lives. You know, I'm hearing that you're in entrepreneur groups and that you actually are caring for yourselves and being parents, all this fun stuff. Each of you, whoever wants to go first, one grounding habit that just makes you feel, you know, like Juliet and makes you feel like Kelly, like something that you can't live without that you kind of want to spread.
Sleep. For me, when we really protect sleep, it has ripples throughout the whole day. We feel like we want to train. We're more durable. We can go harder in the paint. But sleep doesn't begin when I lay down in bed. Sleep actually begins in the morning. Am I getting full sun exposure? Do I move during the day so I accumulate enough non-exercise activity so I feel sleepy? What do I do before I go to bed to help me cue my brain? I get off my phone. I start reading a book, right? I stop drinking caffeine at 4 o'clock. Juliet stops drinking caffeine at 12 o'clock. We don't drink very often because it messes with our sleep. And so we end up looking at all of these behaviors during the day to set ourselves up. And then we really protect our sleep. We are in bed in the 9:30, 10. We sleep until about 6:30. And we find that if we really protect that 8 hours or 8+ hours, then everything else in our life is better.
All the other habits
my
fall
skin
into
is
place.
better. I recover better. I can work harder. I'm more pleasant.
We have the motivation to make a salad for lunch and walk 12,000 steps and get up and exercise.
It is free money.
It is free money.
And people are not taking it seriously. They're reading on their phone. They're watching Netflix. I mean, Yellowstone is super fun. We get it. But the idea here is you have to have some walls here. And it's to the point now where if we work with professional athletes, which we do a lot, I have them track their sleep. If I'm working with people in pain, we track their sleep. If you're recovering from an injury or surgery, we track your sleep.
Before we hop to Julia, let me ask you a question about that, Kelly, because, right, you know, I'm an entrepreneur. I try to work out twice a day, try to read books, trying to do as much as I can, right? I'll be honest, I get an internal feeling of guilt sometimes. So my thing is I like to wake up extremely early. I'm one of those win the morning type of guys. So if I'm not in bed by 8, I wake up at 4:15. I won't get my sleep. I find that I have to get up early, and I get that guilty feeling. Do you ever get that, or how do you deal with that?
No, I'm too old to feel guilty about not sleeping or getting up early. Look, what you forget the aspect of entrepreneurship, what you figured out is that you get your most work done and you're most productive in the morning. That's fantastic. Juliet loves to train in the morning, for example, but I don't. So understanding that there is variation in human beings. What's not variable is that 7 hours of sleep is our minimum cutoff for quality sleep. If you're getting 7 hours of sleep, that's survival mode. Anything less than 7 hours of sleep, and you are a stressed animal. Blood sugar is high, you're pre-diabetic, you can't recover, you're stressed. And what we often see is that people regularly, they're like, oh, I went to bed at 11 and got up at 6. That's not 7 hours of sleep. That's less than 7 hours of sleep. You were just in bed for 7 hours. So we want people to understand, if you love to do things in the morning, then you're going to have to go to bed early. If you like to go to bed super late because you're a night owl and you kick butt in your life, you're going to have to shift that sleep. But it doesn't matter. We're agnostic about when you do it. 7 is stressed minimum. If you're trying to build a business, raise a family, train hard, change your body composition, get out of pain, 8 is the minimum. So it means you may need to be in bed for 8.5 hours or 9 hours to get 8 hours of sleep. And again, I don't really care when you do that. And for you, you were like, well, I just miss I like to get up in the 4s. And if you don't do that, well, it turns out maybe you're not as productive. So wrap your head around it that way, but then backfill, okay, I have to strive to get between at least 8 hours of sleep if I'm trying to do these things, but 7 is my emergency. And if I end up traveling or doing some phases where I'm getting 6 hours, you're a human being. You can buffer it. You're just not going to be awesome. But just understand that the second you get there, you have to get back to that 7 or 8 hours.
And I just would like to be snarky for a second, but I do think that there's been a lot of this external pressure almost put on people who are in the entrepreneur community by other entrepreneurs, because all everybody talks about on their podcast is their morning routine. Which, by the way, as a mom is so annoying, and I actually think is kind of a sexist thing to talk about. You don't have
a consistent, steady, easy morning routine with kids?
Yeah, but I'm like, you cannot give up sleep to wake up at 4 o'clock and journal and take an ice bath. That is the devil's bargain. None of those peripheral habits that people are talking about, ice bathing and saunaing and journaling and meditating and breathing practice, I would 100% never do any of those things in favor of 1 more hour of sleep. So I don't relate to that at all. I think if you can still get 8 hours of sleep, and then on top of that, do all those practices, awesome. Awesome. That's the ideal, of course. But I would never skimp on an hour of sleep to wake up to meditate and journal. That is, to me, a devil's bargain. Never.
No. I really enjoy that. What I find that I try to do is I try to just not negotiate with myself in the moment, right? For example, I don't, if I set my alarm before I go to bed. If I wake up, that alarm goes off. I don't like to negotiate with myself in the moment, I need another hour of sleep now because I'm jaded, right? I'm tired. I try to get that in the beginning, but I love that because I am one of those people that tries to jam it in the morning, and I guess need to prioritize sleep higher. Julia, what's your one habit?
For me, it's sleep too. I am a hardcore exerciser. Kelly and I both, I think, share. We are lucky enough to have developed the habit of exercise when we were kids. And we both have a high desire to train and move. So, I would still prioritize sleep as my number one. I'm 100% with Kelly. We're totally aligned on sleep. But my second one is I like to move. I always want to be moving, walking, training, exercising.
You track your steps.
I track my steps. What I want to, when Kelly and I know that we're on vacation, it's because we've actually been able to exercise 2 times in a day. Usually what we like to do is an activity and then exercise. So we'll ski and work out, or mountain bike and work out. But for us, that's actually what being on vacation means, is actually be able to move more than we normally can in our normal life. So we're not sitting on the beach. That's not how we like to vacation. We know that we're in our happy place when we can train twice. So I would add, still sleep is my number one, but my number 2 is moving. Moving my body.
I like how you separated activity, and then you both kind of allude to moving or just getting your steps in, things like that. Guys, I'm looking at the time here. I feel like we're kind of coming up on it. Do you guys have 10 more minutes?
Yeah, totally. We're fine.
Awesome. Let's keep it going. So one question that I had was, I saw that you guys have something called Stand Up Kids, and I wanted to hear about why that was started and a little bit of behind the scenes, if you will, about that.
Let me start. In 2010, I did a Google Talk at the Google campus called Being Desk-Bound. Because what we saw was that every big company on the planet was starting to struggle with a whole set of musculoskeletal and performance outcomes because people were sitting down. Remember, this is not about sitting versus standing. This is about moving versus not moving. And the problem was that the big employers were having more and more back pain, musculoskeletal pain, problems around ergonomics, right? Around, their people going to the office and then not moving all day long. And all of those things were ending up on their sort of problem list. So we went in there and said, hey, how can we change the environment so that there's more movement and they have more movement choice? So that was the kernel, because we started trying to work with high performance environments around having people who could focus better in gaming, or work better in the military, or whose hips and low backs didn't hurt after working. So that was the kernel.
Could I add just one thing to that? I think the other thing that was happening at that time in the workplace was what we would call a lot of misplaced precision in terms of ergonomics. Like literally companies were hiring these people that were saying, okay, you need to move your mouse over by 1 centimeter and you need to sit in this $2,000 chair and have, like it was this crazy, like little micro things they were suggesting to people, which were honestly just stupid and misplaced precision. And, what we started seeing is we're like, man, people are just sitting for too many hours in the day. And one other sort of factoid I'll throw out there is when, as long as it's been tracked, before the year 2000, number one reason people visited their primary care physician was for the common cold. And starting in 2000, of course, connected to the massive use of technology, now since 2000, the number one reason people visit their primary care physician is musculoskeletal pain or injury. And we started seeing, and at the same time, we're also running a physical therapy clinic. We started seeing people coming in with a ton of orthopedic problems that we were like, wow, okay, well, you sit for 14 hours a day and then you're trying to like run a triathlon or train for a triathlon at 6 o'clock in the morning. Like maybe those things are incongruent. So that was 2010.
Yeah. And so, Juliet makes a really good point. And so one of the things that we started to notice as we were writing a book called Born to Run or Ready to Run was that a lot of the kids in the kindergarten all run like little sprinters, like little Usain Bolts. And then halfway through the first grade, the cohort splits and some kids end up heel striking. And so, which is really strange. That's like saying, okay, now you're going to write with your right hand, but halfway through the first grade, we're going to change. And now you have to write with your left hand. Like it's a fundamental movement change. And so one of the things that we started asking ourselves is, well, if we're going into these high performance environments and having these conversations about adults and their environment, why aren't we having this conversation about our kids and their classrooms? And when we started to investigate, what we realized is that kids were in a classroom chair that was designed so it was easily stackable by the custodian staff. That the structure, the infrastructure, and the structure of the classroom was not set up for conducive for learning or for motor development or handwriting control. It was just an inherited old process, actually from the British hegemony, where they would teach kids to sit down and make
for manufacturing.
Manufacturing from the Industrial Revolution. So that is where we got in, and we went to our local school and asked our local school, hey, I gotta read this.
Sorry, someone is ringing our doorbell over and over and over and over again.
Hey, you gotta make sure they get it. Is that a supple leopard behind you guys?
Yeah, that's a leopard. We have a lot of cool stuff back here, actually. Like, that's my signed boxing glove signed by Michelle Obama to me.
That's awesome.
I know. And then that is a football signed by some big football guy. Kelly can tell us who that is. And then over there is a basketball signed by Barack Obama, President Obama. Let's see if we have any other cool stuff over here. Oh, and then this is really important, which we'll have to talk about at another time, but this is my hippo shrine.
I could tell the one on the left was a hippo.
Yeah, because I was attacked by a hippo in Africa. That'll probably be a separate conversation we should have, but I was attacked by a hippo. And so ever since then, I've been collecting little hippo figurines of all shapes and sizes.
Respect the hippo, the murder cow.
And then, of course, I have in my hippo shrine, I also have my Queen Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, of course.
We're gonna eventually we'll have to show you that. Who's
the football? I showed him that stuff, but who's the football from?
Some guy named Steve Young.
Oh, Steve Young. Okay.
Some guy named Steve Young.
Okay, so just to
football star.
Okay, we're gonna just keep going on this. Scoot back in here because I feel like you're not on camera. But just on the stand-up kids thing. You know, one of the things that people said to us early on, they're like, hey, well, you know, I sat at school in the 70s and 80s and 90s and like, I'm totally fine. And, you know, what changed is, of course, technology. and also our sensibility around school and competitiveness. You know, when we were kids, we barely had any homework. We got home from school and went and played outside. You know, nowadays kids as young as kindergarten are going home with homework. So they're coming home and sitting doing homework. Most kids are no longer walking or biking to school. They're spending tons of time on TikTok and other social media platforms. You know, and so what changed is our entire culture around technology, which and our entire environment around it.
Kids are on a screen, in front of a screen, 8 to 10 hours a day, independent of socioeconomic status. So you're not going to strip this out. And as Juliette's pointing out, we went from being able to buffer all that sitting in classes to suddenly we've changed all the rest of the environment, but that remained the same. So we saw that there was an opportunity to change this one thing. Why don't we get kids moving more? Because the data suggests that sitting more than 6 hours a day actually makes you fall into a sedentary lifestyle behavior. Well, if you were only sitting 6 hours a day at school, that's fine. But suddenly you're not just sitting 6 hours a day, you're sitting all these other aspects. So it turns out kids who have ADHD need to move. That sounds reasonable. Let's give them a chance to move. Turns out every kid learns better when they have more movement choice and movement fidgeting. So what we went in to our local classroom, we went to our principal and said, hey, we have this idea. We'd like to run this experiment. Are you down? She was like, no problem. And we were ready to go to battle. We converted our daughter's classroom, and then we converted another classroom. And then the next year, we created the first all-moving school in the world. So we had 500 kids. Not a single one was at a sedentary desk. We had stools if they needed. They all could fidget and move. They could sit on the ground. We weren't making little robot aliens. We were creating a room that could be easily configured, that the desk was actually individually standardized for the child so that all the children weren't sitting at the same desk, at the same height, in the same chair. And all of a sudden, guess what? They did better. The test scores were better. We had fewer discipline issues. Kids didn't mind going to school. They didn't fall asleep. And that rolled on. And that was really where Juliette said, okay, I need to codify this and create stand-up kids.
And I would like to make this really clear point, because this is where people still, you know, they're like, well, I went online and I read an article that standing is bad. And what I want to clarify is that Kelly and I aren't fans of standing desks for kids or adults in and of themselves for any reason other than this earlier point that we discussed, which is human beings are naturally lazy. And we have found that if we constrain our environment by making our workstations a standing workstation, we just plain move more throughout the day. So the reason that we're fans of the standing desk is we think standing desks create a gateway for more movement throughout the day, not because we're like, go stand like a statue for 8 hours. You know, if you were to follow me around with a camera all day, every day, you would see how super dynamic. I stand for a lot of the day. I perch on a stool. I prefer to take interviews like this while I'm sitting in a chair. So, you know, Kelly and I sit on the floor and work at our coffee table. So what we're trying to do is have it look really dynamic and involve a ton of movement all day. And so what we like about standing desks is not standing like a statue for 10 hours so that your back and feet hurt and kill you. What we like is creating these super dynamic workstations, but we found that if your base workstation is a standing workstation, you move way more throughout the day.
Childhood obesity is continuing to be a big scourge. We're still seeing that we have sort of unchecked growth in this category of childhood obesity. And the research is that kids add usually about 1 BMI percentage point every year starting in elementary school. The research is also showing out of Texas A&M and the work by Mark Bendon that if you have a child, giving that child a movement choice by giving them a sit-to-stand desk or a stand desk where they can sit on the ground, they actually reduce their body mass index by a point. So if you run that over 2 years, what you see is that some kids have gone up 2 points and the other kids have gone down 2 points. And that's a spread of 4 body mass index points by doing nothing, by not having a teacher, a PE, not talking about nutrition, taking the sodas out of school. All we did was change the environment, and it seems like we have a possibility of reversing this trend of obesity and diabetes in the United States. That's a revolution.
I'm behind it. I mean, that sounds awesome, guys. And that's a great way to wrap this up here, bringing in everything you do and making a legacy impact. So I love it. And thank you guys so much for joining and taking the time here.
Thank you, Sean. I hope there is a lot of stuff to use in there and that we didn't just clamber on. You want to stop that one? We'll obviously send you our little phone video too, but I hope there's
Guys,
I hope
I'm
there's
standing
useful
up.
stuff. You gotta go
I'm
stand
standing
it.
up just